Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. I'm Deborah Kassendorf. I'm the Executive Director of the Evanston History Center, and I want to thank you all for being here today. Mid-century houses are popular, I see. We've been excited about this one, too. Today's presentation is by Siobhan Moroney, and she's an Associate Professor of Politics and the Chair of American Studies at Lake Forest College. She's going to be talking about her book entitled Chicagoland Dream Houses, How a Mid-Century Architect Competition Reimagined the American Home. And Siobhan's book actually revisits a unique competition for returning World War II veterans and middle-class families. This competition was meant to stimulate new construction design and to address the housing issues of the day. Siobhan will take us through the complexities of that vision. I was also thinking about our topic today and how it relates to the Dawes house. And it was interesting for me to think about that our house is also an example, I believe, of what all our houses symbolize: everyday life and grand aspirations. Both of these dynamics were also at play in the subject that Siobhan will talk about today. I have a couple of thank yous before we get started. I would like to thank our sponsor for today and for the Mother's House Walk, American Vintage Home, and Vicki is with us today. She'll say hello later to you all. I'm betting that a lot of you have seen American Vintage Home trucks as you make your way around town. We have actually had the pleasure of working with American Vintage Home for actually decades, and we've relied on and trusted them with this landmark home. Their expertise is in preservation of historic homes. They have actually helped us with some water damage here that could have been just very damaging if it weren't for their help. So their expertise is much appreciated, and Vicki can give you a couple of helpful tips about your home after the talk. So in the parlor over here, we're going to have a bit of a hub of activity when the talk is over. We got a couple of things going on. As soon as the Q&A is over, you'll be able to go and say hello to Siobhan. She has a few books for sale, and she also has a QR code of how you can buy more books. Vicki will be there as well to talk to you about any questions you might have about older homes or your home. And then lastly, Grace in the corner there. I'm going to wave Grace. Grace is going to be selling tickets to our 49th annual Mother's Day house tour. And I'm sure who's been on the house walk before? A lot, yeah. Well, tickets are now on sale, so we're making it really convenient for you today afterwards that you can buy a ticket from Grace. And thank you again. I know you're going to enjoy today, and I'm going to hand it over to Siobhan.
Thank you. All right, am I on? All good? Thanks so much for coming out on this gorgeous spring day. I'm sure you'd much rather be outside. And this gorgeous location. So if I get dull, all you have to do is look up, right?
I just want to check your microphone.
Okay.
I think you just
closer.
Yep.
Closer.
Everybody wants to hear you.
That's better. Okay. Thank you. I teach at a small liberal arts college. My classes are about 18 students, so I'm not used to this. So thank you for coming. My book just came out in January, and it was a long process. It's an accidental book because I am neither an architect nor actually even a historian, but have somehow become an architectural historian along the way. And what I want to give a little bit of background is that we know a lot about the post-war baby boom, and we know a lot about the post-war housing boom. But I think we've gotten those two things in the wrong chronological order. That we had a housing shortage that began during the United States Depression. The United States just went, almost from 29 to 30 and onward with really hardly building any single-family homes, except for people who were wealthy enough to get a custom home. And then just as the economy started to get better, what happened is that the war came on, and so again there was this stall. And Americans knew that they had a housing shortage. It shows up in architectural publications, it shows up in newspapers, demographers, social scientists, government officials. Everyone knows that is the moment that the war is over, there's going to be a housing boom. They had no idea about the baby boom. In fact, there were some predictions that the fertility rate would actually go down. So they missed the boat entirely on that one. But expecting the housing boom to come, the Chicago Tribune engaged in this competition, an architectural competition. Architectural competitions had been around for a long time. They're actually still around. But most of the time, they were considered ideas competition. You threw up a competition, you had a little bit of prize money, and you were able to generate publicity for architects. You were able to create content for your architectural publication. You were able to sell people on the idea of certain building materials that you might be promoting in your competition. So the Tribune did what it had done before. It had already had a very famous, globally famous competition for the Tribune Tower, which many of you already know about. What you may not know about is that just a few years later, in 1926, they had a small house competition. And those designs from those small houses are all over the Chicago area and waiting for somebody to write a history of that architectural competition, which is not going to be me, right? But they're there. And so it made a lot of sense for the Tribune to do what they'd already done and to announce this competition. They divided the competition into 3 problems. The word problem is actually an architectural term that would be used. What is your problem? And you can see here that they delineated not just the size of the lot and the square footage of the house, but they give you the constellation of the family who's supposed to live there. And that's important. Lots of architectural competitions did that. And so they don't say it has to be a 2-bedroom house, a 3-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house. It has to be 1 kid, 2 kids, or 3 kids. Think about the assumptions here, right? The assumption is, first of all, that the housing solution is a single-family home on a separate lot, okay? That owning a home is better than renting a home, that families are 2 generations, okay? It is parents and young children. They never include grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. None of these houses are built for couples with no children. They're all built for heterosexual couples with children, as you can see. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is that assumption and what are our housing norms. If you wanted to submit to the competition, you had to write first to the Tribune to get a copy of the rules program. This is the kind of ephemera that just gets lost, but I was able to uncover 2 copies. The architect Ralph Rapson had a copy, and it's in his archive, but Marcel Breuer, who submitted a design to the competition and lost, okay, saved his. And you can see at the upper here, there's a little stamp, October 8th, 1945. So if the announcement came out on September 30th, he didn't waste a lot of time and wrote away to get a copy of the competition. This is probably his handwriting, calculating square footage. The program lists all the specific qualifications, but one of the things that was unusual about this competition is that it is not just for architects. You did not have to submit working plans and blueprints. All you had to submit were floor plans, an elevation sketch, and a site plan, which means anybody, in theory, could do it. And anybody did do it. We know that they got almost 1,000 submissions, and a lot of people just sent them in One person, according to the Tribune, just drew a sketch of his own house and put it in, right? So we don't know, the Tribune didn't save anything, so we don't know who submitted and what kinds of things they got. If you wrote away for the rule booklet, it was very clear about what size paper you had to use and how big your lettering had to be, and that probably dissuaded a lot of people. But I think some people would have just been interested in doodling their houses. People who love architecture, like to do that. The rules program also set up all the rules that were established by the Architecture Institute, the American Institute of Architects. And that is because in the 19th century there were a lot of problems with architectural competitions. People would have their designs stolen. Whoever sponsored the architecture competition would just take it and then sell it. And so there's a lot of challenges to an architectural competition. And so the AIA rules stipulated anonymous judging, how you submitted. You had to have a non-voting advisor. Boyd Hill was the non-voting advisor, and he really ran this competition during the competition and even subsequently for the building project. One other thing that they did that was distinctive is that most architecture competitions are judged exclusively by architects. And we'll talk about what that entails later. But the Tribune included architects and builders. And my argument is that that's one of the things that really makes this competition distinctive, because builders on the jury brought a whole different kind of sensibility than those who were just thinking about designs on paper. The last thing that makes this distinctive is that the Tribune announced that they had a plan to build houses from winning designs. Most architectural competitions of this time and earlier were what are called ideas competitions, right? Just float out the ideas and we'll print them up. But the Tribune said no, it was important to get people working, and it was important to house people who were going to be needing housing because of that pent-up demand from the Depression and then the war. Once the Tribune determined the winners, they had 8 winners, it's an odd number, they had 24 winners, they had 8 winners from each of the 3 problems. They began publicizing that in their Sunday papers, and in 5 successive Sundays, they had big full-page displays like this. This is in black and white because it's taken from the Tribune archive, but it was initially, of course, it was originally in color. They had this brand new Sunday color graphic section. They were, of course, trying to sell papers and trying to get more people to read papers. They encouraged people, they told people that these were coming, and they encouraged them to save them, save your copies of the papers, hold on to them. And they began publicizing information about the winners themselves. Many of the winning architects were serving in the military and still in the military by the time the announcements were in. Certainly many of their photos showed them in uniform. There was one woman among the winners. I've been able to identify 8 women who submitted to the competition. One woman won. It's one of the advantages of anonymous judging. It allows opportunities for people who might not ordinarily win a competition to get in. So they really pushed the publicity, and they did this actually for the next couple of years, not just once they announced the winners, but then subsequently for the building projects and all the way through the buildings, as we'll see. One of the things that they did is these are the sketches that were supplied, or sketches were supplied by those who submitted. But the Tribune commissioned 5 artists to do professional renderings. And there's a great story from the architect Coder Taylor that I found in the oral archive at the Art Institute. And somebody called him up and said, "Hey, I've got your rendering. Do you want it?" And he said, "Yeah." And he went down to pick it up. And somehow it had moved from the Tribune to the School of Architecture that was at Navy Pier. So I don't have a year on this. And Coder Taylor goes down there to pick up his, and he sees 6 others, and he asks the secretary, what are you going to do with these? And she said, oh, I'm just going to probably throw them away. And he says, can I have them? And he kept them, and so he had his and 6 others, and when he retired, he donated them to the Art Institute. So there are 7 of these renderings in the Art Institute. They are, unfortunately, some of them are misattributed. They are attributed to the architect, but not to the artist who drew them. But you can see them on their digital archive. This is the house by Coder Taylor. There's one that I know of these built. This is in Highland Park. This is a house by Raymond Garba. There's one in the Deer Park neighborhood of West Ridge, West Rogers Park. And this is a house by Charles Schroeder, and the Schroeder house is on Sunnyside in Portage Park. And we'll see some photos of these houses and how they don't look like this. Okay. One of the things that the Tribune did is something that it had done for its previous architectural competitions, and that is that it had an Art Institute show. They had partnered with the Art Institute when they had the Tribune Tower competition, and they displayed entrants, not just the winners and the premium prizes, but lots of other submissions. They did the same thing for their 1926 small house competition, and then they did this as well. They opened it up. The Art Institute thought it was a great success. They had 90,000 visitors during that month. At the time, it was you had to pay 3 days a week, but it was free the other 3 days, and so there weren't really any reasons not to get in. They had people just tramping in. Here you can see this is the governor, and he is holding a picture of I think that is a house by Ubelhack. I actually can't see it from here. And so lots and lots of traffic to publicize this. The show was a little bit premature. It turns out they actually weren't finished with all the paintings. And so instead of opening a full exhibit on February 9th, they kind of had to quietly add to it as the month went on. So they would announce in the paper, oh, new additions every few days. In 1948, the Tribune published a book of the winning designs and 68 other designs. It's a hardback book. This is they actually had a beautiful dust jacket. This book is still in libraries and archives, and it's how I found out about it. I was writing about children's bedrooms and the rise of children's bedrooms. When did we start to think that children ought to have their own rooms? And so in the process of that, I did 2 things. I looked at a lot of parenting manuals. So there's a lot of weird parenting manuals out there. Going back to the night, my favorite's John Watson, who says you don't kiss your babies, because it's unhygienic. But then I also was comparing them to catalogs and floor plan books, of which there are just also dozens and dozens and dozens. And I pulled this one out of somewhere, and only later did I bother to read the foreword, and I learned that it was about a competition. And so I do what scholars do. I start looking around, and I start poking around and trying to find scholarly sources on the competition. Nothing. It had completely fallen from view. There's nothing written. There's an 800-page history of the Chicago Tribune that doesn't mention it. None of the biographical information on McCormick. Nothing on Chicago history. And so I just had questions, and I just kept asking questions, and I would work over the summer, and at the end of the summer I'd have 40 pages, but I'd have a lot more questions, and then I'd have to wait till the next summer because I teach at a small liberal arts college, and I'd have more questions. And so eventually I took a sabbatical and started answering more of these questions. But this remains the best record of the competition. I'm trying to get somebody to print a facsimile edition. I've not had any luck so far. Okay, what the Prize Home book does is it was available for sale. Libraries bought it all over the country. Libraries used to post notices about new books in their collection in their local newspapers, and so I was able to find when places picked it up all over the country. This is a house by Eric Wenstrand. It's one of my favorites, so that's why I decided to include it. This is the page from the Prize Homes book, and so you can see this is what had to be submitted. There is a little bit of copy that was added by the Tribune, as well as information at the address of the designer himself. Eric Wenstrand's really interesting. He's the only non-architect to have won. He was a graphic designer. The irony, of course, is that it probably is the most popular house. I have been able to identify 6 places where this house was built. In the book, it was 5, but last summer, after the book had gone to press, I heard from a woman who grew up in this very house that her dad built when he got the information from a catalog, not the Prize Homes catalog, but a different one. And she has all kinds of archival material. She has a ledger that shows how much they spent on every tool and every nail. And she also has it's one story, but it's sort of it's a 3D model, big tabletop model of the house that her dad built and that they wouldn't let her or her sister play with because it was too valuable. And she's desperately trying to find somebody who wants to house that, which is not me. So the one I found was the Bensonville one. Through the course of my research, of course, I also tried to interview as many people who had lived in these houses. And so I was able to interview the current owners who live in Chicago and the second owners, family of the second owners who live there. I interviewed the Highland Park current resident, who gave me a tour. The one in Deerfield's been torn down, but I was able to track down a former resident who lived there as a teenager. I was able to track down a former resident of the Whiting, Indiana house. And one of the things that I thought made my book the most interesting, it certainly was the most fun for me, was finding people and interviewing them about their experiences of living in their houses. Okay. This is a house by Arthur Sackville West, also built, as far as I know, 3 times. The Palatine house has been torn down as a vacant lot, but the Kankakee house is still there, and the Chicago house is still there. It's very modest. You can't really tell very well, but it's under 1,000 square feet. So it was one of the smallest houses in the competition. The current owners just landed a spaceship on top of their house and just built a whole new second story and pushed out the back. So it's really unrecognizable from the street. One of the things that I do in my book is I talk about modernism and what makes a modern house. And we tend to think we know a modern house when we see it, right? It has all these qualities, the flat roof, the protruding garage, big walls of windows. But one of the things that I want to argue is that all of these houses in this competition were modern houses. Because if you think about modern as how do we actually live, okay, they're modern. Okay? They have separate bedrooms for adults and children because we don't do that anymore. For the most part, they try to give children separate bedrooms because that's become a housing standard. It has modern kitchens, modern plumbing. Every house design, except for one in the Prize Homes book, the 98 that I looked at, has a place for a car because that's the world that we live in. They all talk about, almost all talk about laundry and where to hang your laundry because people want privacy. It also talks about privacy. How do we get privacy within our homes from each other? But how do we get privacy from our neighbors and the people who are driving down the street? So I really, in some ways, just want to emphasize that all the houses are modern regardless of architectural style. That said, we know what modern architectural style looks like, right? There are certain elements that make us peg a house as modern or not, because that ain't it, right? So the traditional exterior has separate elements. So when we're driving down the street, we can see the difference between a modern house and a traditional house. Okay? My point is that until you look inside, you can't really know. Because what I discovered is that the house layouts are pretty much all the same. You can have a house like that has an open floor plan, a modern kitchen, separate rooms for adults and children, and separate rooms for kids, plenty of bathrooms, an owner's suite, which is a relatively new idea. You can have an attached garage, which that one does. Okay. So part of what I want to do is sort of challenge the idea of what makes a house modern. And so my analysis is room placement, garages, fireplaces, multi-generational arrangement within the house, privacy. And my ultimate conclusion is that the prize homes competition was quite different from other competitions, because competitions that were judged solely by architects tended to award prizes to houses that look like this. Architects in the immediate post-war era loved modern architecture, and when they gave prizes, honorable mentions, etc., they thought down with traditional, and they really wanted to have houses that look like that. But at the same time, there were still a bunch of commercial catalogs available. People were still buying houses from catalogs, and the catalogs were put together by people who were builders and people who were trying to sell house plans. People who were selling house plans picked houses like that. And the reason is because that's what people wanted. One architect once complained about, well, what people just want like a modern house that's just clad in a Cape Cod exterior. And the answer was yes, that is what they wanted. Okay. And there was a lot more pushback against modern style than you can imagine. People were worried you can't find people who can build a house like this. You can't afford a house like this because they're just much more expensive. You don't want a house like this because is it going to increase its value? Is it going to hold on to its value? Are you going to be able to sell a house like this? And then in addition, what are you going to put in that house? If you have a modern house, is your grandma's whatnot cabinet with her china going to fit? What about your comfy wingback chairs? So there's a lot of pushback because of furniture and the idea that modern furniture, which is sort of tubular and steel and hard-edged, might not be very comfortable. Prize homes houses from winning designs in the Prize Home catalog, did a better job of combining traditional and modern. And so this kind of house, this traditional Cape Cod, does not really show up in the Prize Home catalog. These two houses were taken from the Prize Home catalogs, although they don't include it. Neither of those houses, as far as I know, have ever been built. But just to kind of come back, look at that house. That's a modern house, okay? And it's labeled a modern house, but it also would fit in any neighborhood. It could sit next to a boxy steel house, but it could sit next to a traditional Cape Cod. Look at that one. That's a very modern house in terms of layout. Has a big open living room, dining area, no separate dining room. Looks very cottagey in this rendering because of the flowers and all. But it also has corner windows. Okay. And so this is the blended house. And that's one of the things that was distinctive about the Prize Home competition. They rewarded the blended house. They wanted something that not too traditional, not too modern. And I think they pretty much hit it. Okay, they wanted to build houses. At one point, the Tribune said they had a plan to build 144 houses in Chicago and in the Chicago suburbs based on winning designs. It wasn't initially in the call, but subsequently what they did is when they started the building project, they matched houses with veterans. And there were 6 groundbreaking ceremonies, 5 of which had veterans who were there. And so here's James McDaniel. This is for a house in Lombard. There were 2 Prize Homes houses in Lombard right across from each other. And so McDaniels is there. He's breaking ground. They did this in Highland Park. They did this in Wheaton. They did this in Chicago, and one other place that I'm not remembering right now. And that was also part of the publicity. We're doing this for the vets. Okay. It turns out that didn't quite work out the way they thought it would, and we'll get to that in a second. In addition to building these houses, the Tribune partnered to have them decorated and furnished with all of the department stores that most of, maybe at this point, everyone is now gone. Sears, Montgomery Ward, Marshall Fields, the Boston store, Spiegel's, etc. And Sears decorated a house in Chicago. The current owners inherited this poster, framed poster from the previous owners, and they allowed me to take a picture of it. That's why it's warped. It had been in the basement, so it's a little bit wobbly. But Sears just used this as part of its own publicity, and so the partnerships with the furniture stores and the department stores. Sears, for example, put these items in their display windows, and so that you could see what was going to be in, or what was in, a Prize Home model house. Once the houses were decorated, they were open, many of them were open to the public for month-long open houses. Here's the Palatine House, since torn down. It's that little small Sackville West house, only 2 bedrooms. Opening day in July of 47, and just throngs of people coming in to see them. We think of a model home as a pretty standard thing, but this is really pioneering on the part of the Tribune to be able to have this. The National Association of Home Builders Parade of Homes is not really going to kick in for the next few years, and I can't say for sure that that these were the very first like this, but I'm pretty sure. One of the things that they did is they built 10 houses all in one neighborhood. This is called Deer Park, was the name of the subdivision. It's in West Rogers Park. It is right at the corner of Pratt and Sacramento. Okay, and then around the corner, 2 houses on Francisco. Sorry, that's wrong. It's on the corner of Pratt and Francisco. They built 10 all at once. They landscaped them. They decorated them. Each department store took a different house, and then they held a month-long open house. 200,000 people came through. They hired accountants to just do clickies as they came along. There were so many people that the Red Cross donated a Red Cross first aid tent right there and a nurse on site. They partnered with car dealerships, so there were cars in the garage. There was food in the refrigerator, kids' pajamas on the beds. WGN, the television station, was not yet in existence, but this open house, well, I'll just go to the open house. This open house was in October of 1947, and WGN opens its television station and starts broadcasting in the following April. So one of the things they did is they set up cameras, and you could see yourself on camera for the first time. Apparently, this kind of freaked people out because this was a brand new experience. Okay. And so here you can see throngs and throngs of people. I was fortunate, when I first started out, I thought, well, they probably passed out flyers, but those are long gone. But somebody saved one and allowed me to make a copy, so I was able to kind of track down some of the ephemera. Each house had a little had a flyer, and you were encouraged to visit each house to save them, and then they gave you a special envelope to make sure that you would do that. By this time, the veteran part of the project has fallen away, and it turns out that none of the designated veterans actually moved into the house. What happened to that was left unmentioned in the Tribune. I think what happened was two things. One is that the Tribune was very ambitious with the building project, and they were too ambitious. There weren't materials yet. They started construction, and then these half-finished houses just sat for a long period of time. The other thing is that these houses were much more expensive than they were supposed to be. The whole point of the competition was to design houses, modest houses that would be for regular people that they could afford. And first of all, it turns out that they were not regular houses that people could afford. And then secondly, on top of that, every single one cost twice what they thought it was going to be. So that little Sackville West house, that little modest kind of, I'll show you that. Sorry. That one was initially supposed to cost $9,000, cost $18,000, right? And so it turns out that this was not the solution to the housing crisis, that the idea that you would have these individual houses with these unique designs, that was never going to work. What solved the housing crisis in Chicago was apartments, because that's actually what most people wanted and most people could afford. And then moving to those kind of cookie cutter suburbs where you had houses that were modest, very modest, and at the same design repeated over and over and over. So this just was a failure in that respect. So this is the Schroeder house as designed, and you can see on the left, the sketch actually makes it look pretty modern. It's got those corner windows, it has that kind of plain door with a pretty minimal little canopy over it. You can't see it very well, but there's glass brick over here, a big wall of glass brick. Okay. And look at the house now. And so you can tell one modification came even with building. They left out those corner windows. They just put in regular windows. Probably that little bay front was added later. Probably that little pedimented doorway was added later. If you know Chicago architecture, you know that there's a style that's called Georgian. Okay. I still am mystified as to where that name came from, but doesn't it just look like every other Chicago house on the block? But it wasn't supposed to look that way. Here's a house in the Deer Park neighborhood. The sketch on the top, this house is built in reverse, so you have to imagine it the other way. But you can see that the current owners have built out that front. They added an additional bedroom. It was a 3-bedroom house now. They added more. They've also built back, way back. They're the ones with the Sears poster, that particular house. Okay. One of the things that I looked at in this West Ridge neighborhood was the changing demographics of the neighborhood. And that is that neighborhood, when it was first built, was brand new. It was pretty empty. It was an empty, kind of a field. It had been a former brickyard. Was predominantly Jewish, and it was full of Jewish residents. Today, that same neighborhood in West Rogers Park is still Jewish. However, it is a much more Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. And one of the things that I learned is that Orthodox Jewish homeowners have very different housing needs. They have more children, and so they need more bedrooms and more bathrooms. The average size of the American family is shrinking, and yet here's a reverse of that, with their family sizes being much bigger. Moreover, one of the things that's changing in American architecture is the dining room. More and more Americans think, I don't really need a dining room. Why do I need a whole room for a place that I might just use once or twice a year? And the dining room has been disappearing. It's been eaten into the kitchen. It's become part of a great room. People are using it for home offices, etc. But when you look at the practices of Orthodox Judaism, the dining room gets use every Friday night, maybe every Sunday afternoon, all the holy days, every Seder, every observation. And so that is one of the things that's changed in West Rogers Park. People have added dining rooms to their houses. They've expanded their houses not to have rec rooms and media rooms, but to have more dining space. So that is one of the things that I think I would like to pay attention to for further research. I'm more interested now in religiosity and home space. Okay. Ultimately, as I said, this was not the solution to the housing crisis in the United States. And some of these houses are gone. Almost every house has been modified in some way to keep up with changing standards. We want bigger kitchens. We want owners' bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms. We have more cars than we used to, even if we have fewer children than we used to. But the last thing I want to leave you with is how much people love their houses. One of the things that was so enjoyable for me was knocking on doors. I cold called people. I tracked down obituaries in the Tribune and then tried to find out the names of descendants who might still be living. And people were so generous with me. The last image here is a birth announcement from a family who were the first owners of this Garba house in West Rogers Park. And I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but it's little baby footprints walking into the front door. And you can see that it is this house, the same house. So I'll leave you with that prettier images. Thank you so much for coming today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm just curious, Chicago is known for its basements. Did any of these homes include basements?
Most of them did. You can't always tell, but there were some houses that were clearly did not have basements, but when built had basements. So, yeah, I think more people just said, yeah, that's absolutely what we need to have.
So was Chicago like the birthplace of modern homes, or did modern homes exist elsewhere in the country and this was sort of Chicago's take on it?
I think this is Chicago's take on it. Certainly there was plenty of modernism that goes back to even the 20s and the international style and the steel and the cantilevered. And you can think of Frank Lloyd Wright as in some ways a modern architect, even if his houses don't look like Richard Neutra's houses. There's a lot coming out of California. There were some really famous architects who submitted to this competition. I.M. Pei, E. Stewart Williams, Kazamo Adachi, Marion Mahoney Griffin, Morgan Yost, Ralph Rapson, and John Vandermeulen. They didn't win. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, in response to the basement, I noticed on the layout of the Sackville West, it looked like,
It did seem to be a basement.
that long, empty
read the word
place.
basement.
Oh, now I can see it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely, it's got the furnace and the laundry and, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't read it. It says hobby room. That was a big thing too. They're paying attention to. There's on the plot plans on many of them. They show gardens and they'll specify a vegetable garden. And one of the a lot of there's a lot written about the American suburbs and the growth of the suburbs. And one of the points that some people make is no vegetables. You're not supposed to be growing anything. That's sort of tacky, along with your laundry hanging on the line. But this is right after the war. And even the biggest houses will still have vegetable gardens on the plot plan, right? Because that's your patriotic duty.
How did you go about finding these houses after you found that they were published and won the competition?
Yeah. So because the Tribune publicity led me to a bunch of them. So for example, I could find easily the 10 houses in West Deer Park. Since in some places, I would have the name of a town, And so I joined a lot of Facebook groups that were, if you grew up in Wheaton, or we're from Wheaton. And so I joined those and just put out calls and people responded. And great, that was terrific. But I'm confident there are many more out there than I've been able to identify, I think 24. And I'm pretty sure there have to be more.
Is there any in Evanston?
I don't know.
I think there's one on Ridge.
Let me hear it. I gave a talk. An early iteration of this project was just a digital mapping of the known houses, and I gave a talk at the Chicago History Museum in 2017. And somebody in the audience said, "I recognize that house," and I got tips. And from that, I found another house, and then I found another one just driving around, because I think where you find one, you might find more. So I'm always looking for clues.
Well, I know the owner of this one.
Ooh, even better.
If it is.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned the famous architects that had done submissions, and you had the program from, was it the Marcel Brewer archive? Did he have a sketch of what he had submitted?
I don't think that it's in the archive. When the Tribune when the Art Institute had its show, it included the winners and then like another 150 houses. And so Tribune publicity I was able to identify some of the architects. There are a few known houses and a few archives elsewhere, but I don't know what Breuer's house looks like.
Okay.
I know somebody's done an analysis of Marion Mahoney Griffin's house.
That was the other one I wanted to ask about, because I live in West Ridge, right between that and Rogers Park, and she used to live at a couple of points in her life, I believe, in a very modest house there.
Yeah, her design is a little wacky. It's a little weird. Like you have a bathroom off a kitchen, and like the not really laid out kind of way. People like to have privacy in their homes, and they have bedrooms and bathrooms are normally off a separate corridor, and it's often called the bedroom corridor to give people privacy. But in a small house, that's harder to come by.
Well, I don't know how much small house design she did, because I just know about her projects, like, the really huge planning projects and so forth, and what she did for Wright, frankly.
Yeah, but there were a lot of small house competitions at the same time. That's one of the things I do, is I compare Price Homes houses and the houses in the Price Home books to other architectural competitions of the period.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate knowing about the project in West Ridge where I live. Which quadrant of the corner of Pratt and Francisco was that on?
So you're on Pratt, and there's Francisco, and so there are two houses to the east,
Okay.
and there are 3 houses to the west.
Are they on all sides of both of the streets?
Just only on the
north side?
only on the north side.
Okay.
And then there is there are 2 houses on that's what is that? That's 5 houses, and then there's 2 houses right on Francisco. 3 houses right on Francisco. And then what is that street that's just, I'm having a brain.
I don't have
That's right. And there are two on the south side of that street. So they're all put together. Some of them are not recognizable from the original drawings. And there's a real range. There's a range of size and cost.
I think you said in the book that the collection of designs traveled all over the country. Do you have any sense, was that just to show off, or was that potentially to get developers, builders interested in where any of them built in other parts of the country?
I think both. I mean, it's it advertises the Tribune, it advertises the competition. Yes, they were traveling exhibits of winning designs that traveled all over the country, and they were in bank lobbies, they were in libraries, they were in community centers, they were at state fairs, they were in department stores. So literally millions of people saw these designs at the time. So yeah, who knows? And anyone can just take a picture of a house and bring it to an architect. That's pretty common.
Did they use, I mean, was it mostly frame houses or brick houses?
One of the things I don't do, because I'm not an architect, one of the things I didn't do is I didn't really look at materials, but they do seem to be fairly conventional in material. There is a fair amount of glass brick, but I think they are mostly wood construction homes, because that's what people were used to, that's more traditional. They already had enough problem getting even things like pipes, but steel and plate glass would have been, pretty impossible.
In the Westridge neighborhood, a lot of the other houses were bungalows.
Mm-hmm. There are whole sections in that neighborhood that are just bungalow after bungalow, and those go back to the teens and the 20s. But where these houses are was this big section.
So there was nothing there.
There was nothing there. So there was a brickyard, there was some farming, there was truck farming there, and the developer just bought up all these acres of property. And then, so these are the first 10, but in photos of the open houses, you can even see half-constructed houses beyond it. I interviewed a woman who grew up in one of the houses, and Caswell, is that the name of the street? It starts with a K. And she said at one point there were like 40 kids in her neighborhood. So, because the baby boom did come eventually. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siobhan. That was great. And if anyone has other questions,
Or addresses.
Or
addresses.
again, over in the East Parlor, you can talk to Siobhan, you can talk to Vicki about any of your historic preservation questions, and we also have House to Walk tickets on sale. So thank you for coming.